Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us at the Wednesday edition of Point of View. And of course, this is the last week of 2021. And one of the things we've wanted to do is certainly highlight some ministries that we think you should support in addition to Point of View. Of course, we still are dependent upon your financial gifts, but one of those organizations is, of course, First Liberty. No stranger to the broadcast, because even today I have in studio with me Kelly Shackelford, which is the head of First Liberty. And since we're treating him as a guest, I thought it was kind of interesting because we posted all his bio there. So oftentimes we don't tend to do that. So you can find out a little bit more about that. And our first article that we've posted is one which says, together we can make 2022 a landmark year for religious freedom. And we thought we would feature them, encourage you to support them as well, but also just kind of look back over 2021. So Kelly, it's great to have you in studio.
Good to be here. I've been gone a lot this year, so it's been a little unusual. I hadn't been able to be here as much as normal.
I do occasionally get a question, what happened to Kelly? I said, well, we bring in one of his other staff, which do a very good job, but it's great to see you as well. One of the things we're going to talk about in the next hour are some of the untold stories or the poorly covered stories. And I think it could be said that one of the poorly covered stories is all the victories in religious liberty. If you didn't listen to Point of View, or you weren't subscribing to First Liberty, or maybe a group like Alliance Defending Freedom, you wouldn't have any idea of all the victories that have taken place.
Oh, yeah, it's huge. We've had really, for us, a record number of victories this year. Never had as many. It was like, one every couple of weeks, a major victory. And you almost have to go back and think through those. You forget about them. You forget about the wins we had during COVID, when they were shutting down all the churches. And, we had the very first case in the history of our country that said you can't do that. And it started a wave where we ended up winning a lot of these cases. We won all of our cases in COVID. But, think of things like, the IRS when it tried to deny Christians engage their tax-exempt status, right? Bunny Pounds and Christians engage. A ministry that was just, all they wanted to do was encourage people to vote, to get involved in the process. And the IRS said in writing that, oh, no, they couldn't get status because they say that they're aligned with biblical values, and that biblical values are more closely associated with the Republican Party, and therefore they couldn't get tax-exempt status. And
I could not believe they said that, too.
Yeah, and so, that was like one of a gazillion. We had, I think 2 years ago, we had 320 legal matters that year. Last year, this year that we're in now, that we're not even done with, we're already over 600.
Wow.
So it's just incredible. So you can lose all the victories. And especially you're looking like for us, we have, major stuff that's upon us right now that hasn't even come down. So everybody's focused on that, right? We just argued the Navy SEALs case last week on behalf of the 35 Navy SEALs. Our brief in the Biden OSHA mandate is due on Monday. So, yes, our attorneys are having to work all this weekend to file by 9 o'clock in the Supreme Court on Monday. So, Coach Kennedy's case just got the last brief filed, and it's now in the lap of the court. So next week, they can begin considering taking his case. There's just so many of these I could go through. They're all right up on us. And so you tend to look back at the year and you forget about all those wins that you got. And but it's been just a year of God's favor in that it's been really dark and the attacks that we've had to deal with. But we've never had more victories. And so for all who listen to Point of View who are part of certainly First Liberty and what we do, thank you, because you're a part of those victories. I mean, you get to share in those victories. If you're not, you haven't followed, I would encourage you. I know it's at pointofview.net. You can click on probably my picture or somebody's and go to First Liberty. I would encourage you to at least sign up for the Insider, where you get every week a summary of the big items that are happening. Because otherwise, as Kerby has just said, you're not going to know what's happening. You're not even going to realize the battles that are going on. And certainly, you're going to be much more discouraged because the media tells you all these horrible things. Nobody's telling you the victories and the things that are happening.
Well, again, that's another reason to sign up. Number one, I want you to support this organization, but also to be prayer about that. And if you look at this great picture you have here, First in the Fight Together, you'll see, okay, there's a flight attendant from Alaska Airlines. There's, of course, Coach Kennedy. There's the family that has the case right now before the Supreme Court having to do with the main issue. Then some of this victories in the past, a blind woman witnessing, and on and on. I mean, you just go through this long list of individuals, but many of these are immediate prayer targets. Three of those five I just mentioned are still in some kind of litigation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, while Gail Blair, the blind woman that was banned from sharing her faith in the park, she's won. You can still pray for her because every 2 or 3 weeks she emails us about somebody else who's accepted the Lord.
Yes.
So, but it's a victory in the case. But Alaska Airlines, this is a very important case about whether these woke corporations can fire people because they have Christian beliefs. No, they can't. It's illegal. But this is really going to be the first major case against this sort of wokeism, which is a new religion that is being used to really abuse and bully people all across the country right now. Very important case, that case. As I mentioned, the Navy SEALs case, we just argued.
Yes, in Fort Worth.
And, Judge O'Connor, great judge, is now working through, he and his clerks, on how to make the decision, how to write the decision. Boy, pray for Judge O'Connor. I mean, this is not only going to affect these 35 Navy SEALs, but what's going on to people in the military right now is disgraceful is not a strong enough word. I mean, there's a Fox News article today that just, it makes you furious and it breaks your heart. And what's happening, what came out in the testimony, is the commanders of these SEALs didn't want to do this. This is not their decision. This is coming from the administration. So this is not about what is best for our military. This is about some political purge of people within the military. And they're threatening them, their families. People who have given their whole careers are being thrown out of the military. Our best people. I mean, these Navy SEALs, these are our best. So this case is about literally tens of thousands. I mean, some of the things these people said in the article today was that they're all now telling all their kids and their family, do not go into the military. We can't have that happen.
No, we can't.
This is not what you do, the way they're handling things. It's illegal, number one, but it's horrible for our national security. It's horrible in how we treat people who serve us. So very important case. And then, as you mentioned, we argued the Supreme Court, this huge, really religious freedom / school choice case. It's going to affect, every parent across the country, their ability to pick what school is best for their kids. It's going to affect a lot of Christian schools that aren't even in existence now, that if we win, and I believe we're going to, they're going to have the ability to open because parents are going to be able to choose their school and take their money to that. And then, of course, the OSHA, the Biden mandate, which the court's going to hear the argument next week. Our brief is due on Monday. These are all things happening right now that people can be praying about.
We will take a break and talk a little bit more about what you can do to support in prayer and finances First Liberty. I hope you'll consider Point of View as well. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A case before the Supreme Court should give a significant boost to religious schools. This month, the High Court heard oral arguments on a case from Maine. That state has one of the country's oldest school choice programs. Unfortunately, religious schools are excluded. That may change when the justices hand down their ruling next year. The educational program in Maine provides tuition for students who live in rural areas that don't have a local school. Parents are allowed to pick a school for their children and use the public funds to pay for the tuition. The Nelson family wanted to have their child attend Temple Academy. It is fully accredited and also satisfies the state's compulsory education law. But it is a religious school that also has biblical views about topics like homosexuality. That is why the state would not provide funds for their child to attend this religious school. The case was brought before the Supreme Court by First Liberty Institute, which is led by Kelly Shackelford. Now, when he was on the radio with me, I mentioned that it appeared that the Supreme Court had already ruled on a similar case in the case Espinoza versus Montana. I did a commentary about that case less than 2 years ago. So Maine tried sidestepping that ruling by arguing that they weren't denying funds based on the religious status of a school. They would provide tuition help to religious organizations, but refused to allocate them for religious use. Now, I've suggested that this distinction between status and use is a classic case of making a distinction without a difference. So many of the justices didn't buy that argument either, and I think the court will rule in favor of this family and ultimately in favor of religious schools. That may be another important victory for religious liberty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We all know how rare it is to get the sort of cutting-edge biblical analysis of current events and cultural issues that you get every single day at Point of View. But Point of View can't do it without the support of listeners. I encourage you to, if you benefit from Point of View, show your appreciation by praying for the ministry and seriously consider financially supporting Point of View. The church needs what it provides.
John Stone Street with, of course, Breakpoint and the Colson Center. He was with us last week, and one of the organizations we also encourage you to support. In studio with us for a few more minutes, Kelly Shackelford, then he needs to go on to his busy day. We also have Representative Van Taylor, who will be with us, and next hour we have Gary Bauer. So just a couple of organizations we need to know about. Let's mention something else, Kelly, because we encourage people to go to firstliberty.org, but I also have linked up now firstlibertylive.com. Looks like we're going to have a chance to hear from you tomorrow.
Yeah. First Liberty Live is our media channel where people can go and watch the videos, see the interviews and stuff like that. And it has all of our past ones. I mean, there's all kinds of great stuff if people want to look. We had Rod Dreher on, who I know we've talked about in his book. We've had very famous people, on
Kelly McEnany.
Yeah, Kaylee McEnany recently, a bunch of others. Anyway, tomorrow I'm going to be on. If you want to watch it live, it's firstlibertylive.com, and you can sign up to get a notice whenever something's coming out. I'm going to talk about really what's coming in 2022. As I said, as we're kind of talking about, there's a lot of cases that are really, happening literally right now. But there's also some really big ones that are going to hit that we know of already in 2022. And so we're going to talk about that when it comes to First Liberty and the ones we're working on. It's amazing. Usually you go into the next year, going, there's a big case we have going that'll go there, but you're not sure what's going to happen. And then things happen. This case, we've got a multitude of cases that are going to be huge, huge cases that we know are happening in 2022. So it's we thought we would do that right before the end of the year. And it's a great way to update all the supporters, let them know that they're making a difference and that big cases are about to come. So the battle's not over.
Let me just mention, I'm holding up my phone right now, you have a First Liberty Live app. So that is a way in which you can watch it on your phone. So that's an action item. We've also posted this piece, Together We Can Make 2022 a Landmark Year for Religious Freedom. And you have a 2-minute video that people can watch there. So that gives them a little bit of an idea of some of the things that are happening. And let's just talk about what happens if you win your cases. First of all, what happens if indeed you've already illustrated the fact that we are not just talking about what happens to one family in Maine, but if indeed you get the precedent you're looking for, this could change the whole nature of religious education across the country, couldn't it?
Well, absolutely. I think about it, there are school choice programs all over the country. If we win the case, and I do think we're going to win after the oral argument, we'll see. By the way, if people want to, if they've never listened to an oral argument, they can go to firstlibertylive.com and we've got the argument there where they can listen. We talk, I think it was Jeremy was out front of the Supreme Court beforehand saying, here's about what you're going to hear about. They heard it. I walked out of the Supreme Court afterwards, told them what we thought happened. So if they've never gotten to experience that, it's kind of shocking for some people.
Yes.
A lot of people were listening knowing that we supposedly probably had 6 justices on our side. But as soon as we got up and started arguing, they attacked us like we were their worst enemies, and people were shocked. They were like, oh, no, this is horrible. But then as soon as the other side got up, they went, oh, my gosh, they're in worse shape than we are. So it's a great thing to realize that this is a real process. And it's fun to hear some of the really great questions that are asked by the justices who obviously studied this. They have really bright attorneys underneath them. So like in our case, one of my favorites was Justice Alito. This is Maine saying you can pick as a parent to take your money anywhere you want, any public school, any private school, as long as it's not a religious school. And so Justice Alito said, so a CRT school would be okay. A white supremacist school would be okay under this, but not a religious school. And so, it was fun to watch the attorney for Maine say, well, I'm sure our legislature would come into existence and stop that if that were to occur. It's like, but the point is, under your current law, the only people being discriminated against are the people who choose like the little Christian school. And so it just showed the ridiculousness of what they're trying to do and how discriminatory it is. So people can listen. But I think this is big in ways people don't think about. For instance, people think, oh, great, Christian schools will be able to participate in school choice programs. And there's school choice programs everywhere across the country in certain cities, states, etc. But more importantly, I think, number one, there are schools not in existence now that will be able to come into existence.
That's true.
And there are kids. Think of how one school can change a young man or a young woman's future. Mm-hmm. It could be a child who changes this country forever. Well, multiply that times all the kids all across the country where their parents get to make. So this can have much bigger impact than we'll ever understand if we get a victory. And I do feel like we're going to get a victory. We won't know until June, probably about the same time the abortion decision is handed down. They'll hand this decision down because it's one of the more hot button, kind of issues, as you will hear if you listen to the oral argument. But be praying, because right now is when they're really writing the opinion and all that. And this could be a significant opinion, and I feel like it's going to be.
People might say, well, what about Coach Kennedy? That'd be nice for the coach. But again, this could change the whole idea of free exercise. And in West Texas, they have a phrase, if you throw a rock in the midst of dogs, the one that yelps is the one that got hit. And you and I have been noticing some people that are yelping pretty loud because they're saying, if this continues, this whole idea of free exercise is going to have an equal standing to the establishment of religion. religion. And so this is an important case too, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, Coach Kennedy is big on so many reasons, on so many levels. I think just his example. I mean, what do people do if they're told, if you go to your knee again, I'm going to fire you? I mean, there's a part of this to me that is even more powerful than the legal issue. I think this is a message from God. Are you willing to take a knee?
Yeah.
Coach Kennedy took a knee. He's now been fighting for 6 years. And we could go into details of how outrageous what's been going on in the case, and the Ninth Circuit especially. But he's now at the Supreme Court. The last brief is in. It's now, quote, ripe for the court to decide to take it or not. It just takes 4 justices. And if they do, this will not only be a Coach Kennedy case, it'll affect every coach.
Oh, sure.
Every teacher. It'll even affect every person who works for the government in any capacity across the country. Because what they're arguing here is, if you are a government employee and you are, quote, on duty, you're not allowed to pray.
Right.
Well, what a stripping of people's...
No free exercise.
No teacher can bow their head over the lunch cafeteria or they're fired. And this goes on. And there's even further implications in different parts of the case about free speech, a number of other things. But then you mentioned they've also hinted earlier in the case, 4 of the justices said that they were interested in having this to review the Smith decision. The Smith decision has caused tremendous damage to the free exercise clause for, almost 40 years. They're basically saying we're willing to relook at that. So this could have really an impact for everybody in major ways. And so I would tell people, put this way up on your prayer list, because the court can take it or not. It's their decision. It's discretion. They've said they're really interested in it. All we need is 4 justices. And those 4, by the way, said that before Amy Coney Barrett joined the court. So there now should be 5 at least who really realize this is a serious issue. If they take this will be the big case of the next term. And I think it'll have a great impact in what it'll do for our country.
Well, again, let me encourage you to find some of the information we have on our website. You can just simply go to First Liberty. They have a match there as well. It's a dollar for dollar match, and so that's a match challenge that they have, and we certainly think very highly of First Liberty. As I said before, I support them. We want you to support them in prayer. I hope you can support them financially. And Kelly, I know you got a busy day, but I appreciate you giving us half an hour today.
I'm happy to do it, and thank you. I'll let everybody know, just like Point of View, First Liberty we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Your donations are tax deductible. So I would encourage you to give to First Liberty so we can help more people and get more precedent set. There's tremendous opportunities, but I'd also encourage you to support Point of View. There's just no show like this on the country, and it makes a huge difference in getting information out. It's a wonderful ministry.
You can find it on our website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can give us a call, 800-347-5151. We'll be back with more right after this.
None of us like sending our hard-earned money to Washington. There's a way to avoid paying taxes and to use the money you save to fight for your values in the culture. And it's completely legal. If you make a gift from an investment account, even a retirement account, when you sell stocks or bonds to give, you have to pay capital gains taxes on the increased value of the stock. If you give the stock, there are no taxes, and you get a tax deduction for the full value of your gift. If your gift comes from an IRA, you can also make a qualified charitable distribution and skip paying taxes. This is also a great way to use that required minimum distribution. Check with your tax advisor to find what's best for your personal circumstances. But this is a way for your gift to have an even greater impact on the culture. For more information, you can call us at 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. Give and save on taxes. It's a great idea. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, as we come to year end, we want to kind of look back over Congress, what has happened in the United States Congress this last year, what could happen in the future. And certainly one individual that can give us a very good perspective on that regard is Representative Van Taylor, individual that serves now in the 3rd Congressional District in the state of Texas. Before that, served also in the Texas House of Representatives and the Texas Senate, and joins us now by phone. So Representative Van Taylor, always great to have you on the program with us.
Great to be with you, Kerby.
We have posted a couple of pieces, but I might start with the easy one, and probably the most controversial one from the Van Taylor newsroom. And by the way, we have a link there. So for those of you, even if he is not your representative, and most of you probably have someone else representing you in Congress, you have a statement about the radical reconciliation spending bill. And I love what you start by saying. This morning, Democrats doubled down on their radical spending agenda, ignoring Americans buried under inflation and a crisis in the border. And of course, you can go through this long, long list. This was something which is, I think, of great concern to most of our listeners at a time when we are spending more than we are taking in a time when we have inflation, when we do have some crises, but those are things like a crisis at the border, of botched withdrawal of Americans from Afghanistan, and the list is quite a long list. That was the thing that the Biden administration decided that it wanted to push through Congress. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, you're spot on that it is an incredibly radical bill that the Democrats had as they pushed through this reconciliation bill that would spend almost $5 trillion. And just so everybody can get that in perspective, that is somewhere in the order of $17,000 per man, woman, and child. So this is an enormous amount of spending that would have to be paid back. I mean, the Democrats are they love to do this borrow and spend gimmick, and so the problem with that is that it creates inflation, and that inflation is something we're all going to pay the price for. I think you may have seen that recently that a family this year is going to pay $3,500 more per year to pay for the basics, to pay for gas, to pay for rent, to pay for food, to pay for clothes, to pay for school supplies. And this is hurting average, hardworking Americans. And this reconciliation bill just was more fuel on the fire, more deficit spending, more taxes, more social programs, more Green New Deal programs. It was terrible. I opposed it. I'm very glad to see that it looks like it's dead, but I will continue to fight it and tell people why it was so bad. Not that they need to be told. I think the more Americans that understand how dramatically bad it was, the better off America is going to be.
Again, when you say we don't need to be told, sometimes we need to be reminded, though, because we have first of all, not just an administration, but a political entity as well as a media establishment that all are saying, first, there's no inflation, then, well, maybe inflation is transitory, and finally now inflation's probably good for you. And one that says we're going to solve the COVID crisis and then says, no, I guess we'll just have to leave that to the states. So there is a need, probably more than ever, Congressman Taylor, to really say the obvious, because sometimes it's hard to find people actually speaking truth to a culture and trying to convince us that everything's okay when it really isn't okay.
No, I think you're spot on that point. It's important to speak truth to power, and the Democrats don't want to hear it. They refuse to listen to the American people. And I'll make this point. What the Democrats tried to do with this reconciliation package, even though they know that Americans are against it, they want to impose their will on us. And that is undemocratic. I mean, that is the antithesis of a democracy. I mean, in our Republican system, it's supposed to be, hey, the majority of the people kind of get to decide what to do. And the majority of the people say, hey, I don't want a bunch of deficit spending. I don't want to have, a lot of inflation. I don't want a lot of Green New Deal programs. I don't want a lot of new social programs. I don't want to be in a socialist state. And the Democrats try to impose their will on us. That is ultimately undemocratic. It's the counter of what they should be.
Let's see if we can talk about one more issue in the past, then we look to the future, because that's certainly going to be a lot of our focus.
Sure.
But one of the other things that is on your website, and people can go to vantaylor.house.gov, or you have the link there. So whether he is your representative or not, and most of you have a different representative, I think you'll benefit from some of the material that's posted there. You also voted against adding $2.5 trillion to the national debt ceiling. And it seems to me that every time we turn around, we've got to increase the debt ceiling. And the illustration I like to use, Congressman Taylor, is it's like overrunning and spending more on your credit card than you actually have as a debt limit, and then trying to convince the bank that instead of paying it down, you want to add more to your credit limit. And that's kind of what's going on with the federal government, isn't it?
Yeah, no. Look, it was a desperate attempt for the Democrats to pay for the Build Back Broke agenda. To raise the debt ceiling $2.5 trillion, an astronomical sum of money. It's something like $7,500 per man, woman, and child in this country. It's a huge amount of money that we're all going to have to pay back eventually. I mean, there's no free lunch in this game, and the Democrats are turning a blind eye to the highest inflation our nation has seen in 40 years, and we know that printing money creates inflation, and the Democrats, by this deficit spending that the Democrats are pushing for, is creating inflation. The pain that they are creating is real, and the Democrats are trying to they're trying to deny it exists. They're trying to say it's good for you. Believe you me, Kerby, before it's all said and done, they're going to blame it on Republicans. They're going to say that somehow this inflation is a fault of Republicans, because it can't be their fault. And that's one of the in Milton Friedman's book, Free to Choose, he actually says, governments refuse to acknowledge the responsibility of creating inflation. But the Democrats have created inflation.
Well, again, you served in the military, and so you're well aware of the fact that we've had a number of other disasters, not the least of which I alluded to in terms of withdrawal from Afghanistan. But we look ahead now to a couple of issues, and that is it possible that we find ourselves militarily in some kind of confrontation with Russia over troops on the border of Russia and Ukraine, or a confrontation with China in terms of wanting to assert its influence and maybe even attack militarily Taiwan? Or is it even possible we could all of a sudden find ourselves in a two-front war? What about that? You've looked at these issues from a military point of view, and I'd like to get your perspective.
Well, I think that it's very worrisome. President Biden's feckless foreign policy, what happened in Afghanistan, clearly the single largest foreign policy disaster in the history of our country, because not only did Biden give an entire country to a terrorist organization that has attacked the United States, that has been at war with the United States for the last 20 years, but President Biden also gave them $85 billion of arms. But Biden also infuriated our allies because he did it without consulting with them. And even though our allies through NATO, came to America's aid. So an attack on one is an attack on all. Is the first time that the United States invoked the NATO treaty to get other countries, European countries, to come and help the United States in Afghanistan, and they stood by us for 20 years. For 20 years, our allies stood beside us, and not just stood beside us. And at press conferences, they fought beside us, they spent money beside us, and they died beside us. And the United States literally turned our backs on our own allies. And that created a tremendous glee in Tehran, in Moscow, in Beijing. And you had, like the president of Taiwan in the middle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan tweeting out, we're going to stand up to the Chinese. And I know other countries will stand up to the Chinese because what the Chinese were saying is, look, Taiwan, the Americans will fold. They don't stand. They won't help you. And you think Moscow wasn't saying that to the Ukrainians? Oh, look, Kiev. There's no way the Americans will stand up for you. They won't even stand up in Afghanistan against someone who's actually attacked them. And so Biden, again, with his feckless foreign policy moves, showed how weak he could be, and has really emboldened our enemies. And so now the United States confronts even more serious problems in the Straits of Taiwan, in eastern Ukraine,
yes,
and in the Arabian Gulf.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Representative Ann Taylor. By the way, if you'd like to join the conversation at any point, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. But, of course, we're going to be moving into 2022 as an off-year election. And so I want to get into some of that and what does a future Congress maybe look like, what's going to happen in this election season. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, everybody. Max Lucado here. I want to join the loud chorus of applause and appreciation for Point of View, as well as Christian Radio. The unique voice of this powerful ministry over the airwaves is absolutely essential in this day and age. And so I stand with those of you who support and encourage this powerful ministry. I thank Kerby and for the faithful friend that he's been to me all these many years. May God bless this ministry. Let's stay behind it.
Our good friend Max Lucado reminding you that we're coming to year end, and in just a minute we'll talk a little bit more about how you can support this ministry. We do have a match on the table. It's a dollar for dollar match, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Let's, if we can, though, continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Representative Van Taylor. And Congressman Taylor, of course, we're dealing with an election next year, and it's important because I see a lot of change. If you look at the first congressional district in Texas, that's Louis Gohmert. He's running for the Attorney General, so there's going to be a new person somewhere there. Second congressional district, Dan Crenshaw, I know that they've put a target on his back. The Democrats want to remove him. And you're in the third congressional district, and I know you have some opponents as well. So for people that say, well, I will pay attention come November, right now is the time to begin to figure out what's happening in some of these primaries, isn't it?
It is. And there's a lot of energy in the Republican Party, and you see that in new Republican groups, new organizations, and a lot of people running for public office. I was at a meeting right before Christmas where there were 150 people in the room, and 49 of whom were candidates for public office. So there are a lot of people, and actually most of them had their campaign manager or a spouse or a child there with them, just to kind of squaring them around. So there's a lot of energy in the room, a lot of candidates running in a lot of places.
What about this? Because it seems to me that once you get into sort of the election season, the possibility of passing a Build Back Better Act or an amnesty for immigration or a variety of other issues begins to diminish rather dramatically. But is it possible and is it likely that Republicans could indeed by this time next year be taking over the control of the House of Representatives, and then some of the legislation that you've had to vote against might not actually even be proposed in the first place?
Yes. I mean, probably the most important thing that can happen for the future of our country next year is the Republicans take back the U.S. House of Representatives and send Nancy Pelosi packing and put an end to this socialist agenda that the Democrats are trying to shove down the throats of the American people. The Democrats are trying to do tremendous amounts of spending, new social programs, creating more inflation, more deficit spending, increasing the national debt. And winning the House back next year is the first step toward putting an end to that.
Let's, if we can, maybe talk about one issue that you've brought up many times, and I think you're one of the few people that ever brings it up, and that is this whole budget process for Congress is broken. And so people might say, well, you're really partisan. No, unfortunately, it's been broken under Republican leadership. It's been broken under Democratic leadership. And we right now are broadcasting to about 40 different states, and all those states and many others that don't even listen to this broadcast are required to balance a budget. When's the last time we've had a balanced budget in the United States Congress and the federal government? And some of that has to do with the fact that we have a budget process that's broken, isn't it?
The budget process is broken, Kerby, and I'm really glad you brought that up. It's very, and it doesn't have to be. We have the current budgeting process was set up in 1975. So we have tried 45 different budgets under that process. Only 3 have been on time and only 6 have been balanced. We have not had a balanced or on-time budget since the 90s. And I've been in Congress 3 years. By law, I'm supposed to have 3 separate budgets are supposed to have passed the U.S. House of Representatives and been signed into law by the president. I have never voted on a budget in the 3 years that I've been in the U.S. House.
Wow.
That is how broken our budgeting process is. The process that works is a single bill budget. That's what we do in Austin, here in the state of Texas. That's what we do for the city of Plano, for Collin County. Most everybody in the world uses single bill budgets, including businesses like your radio station or universities. I mean, whoever it is, institutions use single bill budgets. And that's what Congress did up until 1975. And as soon as they went to the current budgeting system, which is basically 12 separate appropriations bills, that system literally has never worked for anybody. It didn't work under Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. It just, whoever was president didn't work. I think it's time we go back to a single bill budget, because we know that worked for the United States of America before. It works for all the other countries on the earth. It works for states, cities, counties, school districts. Nobody does it the way the United States government does it, and it's a completely defective system. and I advocate for changing it and going back to the single bill budget. That is the clear and easy answer to getting our fiscal house in order.
Certainly is. If you'd like to know more about Van Taylor, whether he's your representative or not, we have a link on that website. If he is your representative, you may want to know more about where he stands on the issues. If he is not, you might want to take some of the things that are posted on his website and ask your own representative. Here's a very good idea from Congressman Van Taylor. Why wouldn't you consider this? Or maybe they've considered it or something else. And so those would be some topics that you can have. But first of all, let me just say Happy New Year. And Congressman Van Taylor, thank you for serving the 3rd Congressional District, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, great to be with you, and a Merry Christmas and a joyous New Year to you and to all your listeners.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer. We posted one of his end-of-day reports, which is entitled The Genocide Olympics. We mentioned that yesterday, but we're going to get into a little bit more talking about China. We'll talk about some of these budget issues and a number of other things, and another organization that I really encourage you to consider supporting. But just before we take a break, you have already had a chance to hear from 2 individuals, very smart individuals, by the way, very well educated, and are certainly talking about and advocating for various issues ranging from religious liberty to domestic and foreign policy issues. We're going to give you some more of that with Gary Bauer, and then we'll get into some of the issues in the news. And if you value that kind of conversation, the people that we bring to this program to discuss these issues, the articles that we post, the videos that we post, and most importantly, some of the take action items that are there, we want you to consider what you might do between now and the end of this week to support this ministry. As I've mentioned, we do have a match still on the table, still viable until it runs out, and it is a dollar-for-dollar match, which means if you would like to make a gift of $50, essentially that becomes $100, $500 becomes $1,000. And we also, as you go to the website, have a picture of one candle that then lights another candle, lights another candle, lights another candle. And we recognize that, first of all, we want you to light candles and to really be the salt of the earth and the light of the world in your community. We want to equip you to do that, because then when you do that, many others feel emboldened and encouraged to light their candles and make a difference. And so this is one of the reasons why we've used that illustration, why we think it is so important for you to do what you can to actually have an influence in your sphere of influence. We've been talking today with 2 individuals that have influence in the courts, influence in Congress, but you know what? They're never going to have an influence in your neighborhood, in your family, in your church, your community. That's what you are going to have to do. And so let us help you do that in an effective way. And as you go to the website, pointofview.net, you can click on that button that says donate. And that is a way in which you can support this ministry. Like we said, we have a dollar-for-dollar match that's available right now. If, as we're going to a break, you'd like to talk to someone off air, that's a different number. It's 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, a pledge line. And we'll be back with our good friend Gary Bauer right after this.
Sometimes the daily news is flat out confusing, depressing. In fact, it's dark. In the chaos, Americans are searching for a light. They want the unfiltered truth in language they can understand. The psalmist pointed us to the answer. He said, "For it is you, God, who lights my lamp. The Lord, my God, lightens my darkness." At Point of View, we carry the torch of God's truth every day. With the Bible as our guiding light, we help listeners navigate the confusing time in which we live. And when you give generously, you are like a beacon of light for people searching for sound, credible truth. And now, it's up to you. December 31st is our deadline for the incredible matching challenge of $85,000. Your gift today has twice the impact. Everyone needs the light. Please give generously on or before December 31st at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151. or online at pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time talking with our good friend Gary Bauer. And of course, as we come to year end, we've encouraged you to support Point of View. But more importantly, we've also tried to highlight one or two ministries that you need to support as well. And certainly one organization that we have depended on so often is American Values. Gary Bauer, of course, being the president of that individual that served as chief domestic policy advisor under Ronald Reagan's administration. And we really do want to encourage you this hour to consider what you might do to give to his group and his organization. We have already posted his end of day report. And you know that even when we don't have him on, we talk about him. I mean, how about I think it was 2 days ago, we read almost its entirety on the Genocide Olympics, talking about China. And of course, we have some other material that you will find on his website, for example, on some of the top pro-life victories of 2021 and so much else. He does also have a match. So that means as you give to American Values, and we have a link there for you at pointofview.net, that means your gift will be doubled, and we really encourage you to support him. And Gary, let me say a belated Merry Christmas, but most importantly, Happy New Year, because I think we're looking forward to a very exciting 2022, aren't we?
We sure are, Kerby. And hey, thank you for the kind remarks at the beginning of our time together today. You've done that over and over again. I can often tell when you have read something on the end of day, because I'll notice a little uptick on online donations, and I think to myself, I bet Kerby is quoting from my end of day. So I really appreciate that, and it's always a pleasure to be on the show. But to your point, I can't wait for this year to be over. It's got to be better in 2022, Kerby.
Well, let's look ahead, although I will look behind in just a minute, but look ahead, since we did spend a fair amount of time talking about the Winter Olympics, which are just really a little over a month away from now. You quote the former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in which there has been such a concern that when you bring the Olympics to a country, let's go all the way back to, 1936, Berlin, Germany, or you bring them to Beijing in 2022, there's sort of almost an international seal of approval, and you and I are some of the only lone voices out there talking about how disastrous we think this is.
You're absolutely right, Kerby. I think I think most Americans are understandably so overwhelmed with all the problems that we're facing as a country right now, the inflation and crime and breakdown of law and order and all the things that we're seeing in Washington, that they can be forgiven if they're not spending a lot of time thinking about what's going on in communist China. But whether we're thinking about them or not, they are certainly thinking about us. It is clear as it can be that they're going to use these Olympic Games as a tremendous propaganda coup for the Chinese Communist Party and for Premier Xi. And so it is. There's a lot of downside to these games. I think we all want our athletes to do well, and I always hate to be against an Olympics or want to postpone it or boycott it because the athletes get hurt. But we're dealing with a power in communist China that literally wants to hurt us all and is being very aggressive in its efforts to undermine the United States. So these are going to be sad Olympic Games, very reminiscent of the Olympic Games that happened under Adolf Hitler.
You know, the other side of that is something you write about as well, that you have various American corporations that have been the sponsors of those games. And it also relates to something that I think I'll actually post tomorrow. It just came out from American Spectator by Frank Schell, why China got away with it. You know, it gave the world a deadly virus, took no responsibility for it, and the world shrugged it off. And part of that is that unfortunately for sports enterprises, for major Fortune 500 companies, for a variety of different social media outposts, that very few people, especially in the establishment media or even in some of these woke corporations, will speak out against human rights. Oh, they'll complain about the fact that they actually are requiring a voter ID in Georgia or something like that, but they don't seem to have any concern at all about the plight of the Uyghurs or the plight of even Christians in communist China.
Kerby, it's a scandal. I mean, I don't want to throw that word around lightly, but this is scandalous. If we were in a healthy situation right now, the CEOs of these big U.S. corporations that are acting as apologists for communist China or are putting a blanket on any type of criticism of what the Chinese communists do to their own people, while, as you point out, at the same time, getting deeply involved in partisan politics here in the United States and labeling just normal conservative ideas as being hateful and all the rest of it. If this was a healthy society, those CEOs would have a hard time going out in public because they would be getting booed and singled out for approbation. But instead, these companies get away with it because most of the media doesn't report on it. But to see big U.S. capitalists, the head of some of the most iconic American companies, sucking up to communist China, making apologies for communist China, covering for them at a time when it is absolutely clear that communist China's main goal is to replace the United States as the leading world power, and all the consequences that would come from that for our people and our nation and our future. It really is a scandal.
Well, I do want to talk about some encouraging signs, and one of those is you've noticed a lot of parents showing up at school boards. You also have noticed that a candidate there in Virginia, Democrat Terry McAuliffe, got himself in a little bit of trouble because he said, I don't think parents should be deciding what's taught in the schools. And then just the other day on Meet the Press, Nicole Hannah-Jones, creator of the 1619 Project, which tries to suggest that the reason we fought the American Revolution is to actually perpetuate slavery, also said that, well, they can keep saying that, but it does seem to me that some Americans are starting to say, wait a minute, I think it's time to get involved in the school board elections.
Yeah, that's a great summary, and that's exactly what's happened. And I think, Kerby, of all the things out there that we can be worried about, and the growth of the radical left, and the grab for power, and the increasing size of the federal government, all the rest of it that we talk about all the time, there are these blooms that are peeking up out of the soil. And one of them is the great American people themselves. We're seeing people at the grassroots level of all races and ethnic backgrounds. They're looking at what's happening in their schools and in the popular culture. And I think for a lot of them, it's finally hit them, wait a minute, these are my children. That public schools teachers are paid for by me. I should be a partner in this. You know, we used to say at the Department of Education when Bill Bennett was secretary and I was undersecretary that parents are the first and most important teachers that a child has, and that ought to be taken into consideration now.
Let's take a break, and when we come back with Gary Bauer, we have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A case before the Supreme Court should give a significant boost to religious schools. This month, the High Court heard oral arguments on a case from Maine. That state has one of the country's oldest school choice programs. Unfortunately, religious schools are excluded. That may change when the justices hand down their ruling next year. The educational program in Maine provides tuition for students who live in rural areas that don't have a local school. Parents are allowed to pick a school for their children and use the public funds to pay for the tuition. The Nelson family wanted to have their child attend Temple Academy. It is fully accredited and also satisfies the state's compulsory education law. But it is a religious school that also has biblical views about topics like homosexuality. That is why the state would not provide funds for their child to attend this religious school. The case was brought before the Supreme Court by First Liberty Institute, which is led by Kelly Shackelford. Now, when he was on the radio with me, I mentioned that it appeared that the Supreme Court had already ruled on a similar case in the case Espinoza versus Montana. I did a commentary about that case less than 2 years ago. So Maine tried sidestepping that ruling by arguing that they weren't denying funds based on the religious status of a school. They would provide tuition help to religious organizations, but refused to allocate them for religious use. Now, I've suggested that this distinction between status and use is a classic case of making a distinction without a difference. So many of the justices didn't buy that argument either, and I think the court will rule in favor of this family and ultimately in favor of religious schools. That may be another important victory for religious liberty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
It would be tragic if Point of View did not exist, because not many programs are targeting areas where we need to learn how to think, where we need to learn how to respond, where we need to learn what our options are for active involvement, even how we can share truth with other people. This is a wonderful opportunity you have to literally help the ministry be the most effective that it can be through your gifts, through your financial support. I highly recommend it.
Again, June Hunt talking about the importance of supporting Point of View, and right now we're also featuring a very good ministry worthy of your financial support. Don't ask you to give to an organization I don't give to, and I think Gary knows that I support him and will continue to do so, ouramericanvalues.org, but actually we have posted one of his end-of-day reports from Monday, and I think you will really appreciate that because it covers some of the things we've just talked about, from China to the whole comment by Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project and some others. And if you're not subscribed to the End of Day Report, that's another action item for you to do as well. And Gary, one of the things I appreciate is even as you go to your website, you post other articles, as we do at Point of View. One of those from Life News, the top 5 pro-life victories of 2021. Now, I can think of how long you and I have been in this battle, and we were always hoping that there would be a day in which abortion would be outlawed. And I'm right now broadcasting from a state in Texas where actually the heartbeat bill became a heartbeat law. The latest estimates are that maybe 18,000 unborn babies have been saved by a law that has continued because it was written in such a creative way that you could not strike it down. And so it gives you a vision of what could happen by the middle of 2022 if the Supreme Court rules on this case out of Mississippi. What are your thoughts?
You know, Kerby, I don't want to get too excited, because over the years we thought we were getting close, and then a Supreme Court justice would disappoint us or something else would happen. But I must say that it looks to me, although this is a dangerous game to play, to make these kinds of guesses about judges, but it looks to me that we have a solid 5 votes on the Supreme Court to essentially eviscerate Roe versus Wade. I mean, even if the final decision is a decision that merely sends the issue of the sanctity of life back to each state to pass their own laws, that would be a huge development, because as of now, because of Roe, we are acting as if in the Constitution, one of the greatest documents ever written by mankind, that in that Constitution, our founding fathers put a right to abort an innocent unborn child. Now, of course, your listeners are probably much more familiar with the Constitution than most people are, sadly. But I think they know that if you look at that Constitution, there is nothing in it, nor would the founders have ever put anything in it, suggesting that right up there with the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, there is a right to destroy an innocent unborn life. So just getting that cleared up so that young Americans, as they grow up, are no longer told that this is a sacred right embedded in our Constitution, that would be a tremendous victory for the pro-life cause. It might even be better than that. I mean, hope springs eternal that the court will eventually take the words of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence seriously, where it says that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these the right to life, which is the first one listed.
So good. Let's, if we can, also look at something I will be talking about after we let you go, and that is, seems like even though we don't want to talk about COVID, we almost have to every single day. But yeah, you, in a more recent end-of-day report, I've said something I have, and that is if it was okay to criticize Donald Trump, and candidate Joe Biden did, by saying the 200,000, at that time, 200,000 deaths are due to the failed leadership of Donald Trump, then what do you do now in 2021 when you have many more individuals than that have died, when you've had vaccines and therapeutics and all sorts of other things? Now, the point I make is it wasn't fair to have said that about Donald Trump. It's certainly not fair to now criticize Joe Biden. But when we all through the campaign were assured that this was going to be easily resolved once we get the right leadership in the Oval Office, I think there's a place for at least a little bit of humility. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I do think it's unfair to have blamed Trump, and I think that same unfairness could be concluded in blaming Biden. In fact, given our previous conversation about communist China, it's too bad that all Americans, right and left, could not have united on this and conceded the fact that this virus, the blame for it, is on the shoulders of the Communist Party of China. They're the ones that either had an accident in the lab or even something darker than that, and we end up with this virus that has killed our economy a couple of times and has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans now. I think what's happening to Kerby is that Joe Biden is being judged by the same standards that he attacked Donald Trump on, and it's not going so well for him. The coronavirus was the only issue he was still getting positive marks on. President Biden, but now that is eroding away. Some polls have him underwater on that, and of course on everything else, crime, the border, inflation, he is 10, 20 points underwater. So this is a very important moment for President Biden, and it's one that in many ways could effectively end his presidency if he can't get this under control.
Let's see if we can put your other hat on, the campaign for working families, because I want to look ahead to some of these elections. And even using COVID as an example, right now, 45% of all the new cases in COVID come out from New York State. Can you imagine what it would be like right now if almost half of the cases came out of Florida and your name was Governor DeSantis, or half of the cases were coming out of Texas and your name was Governor Abbott or something like that? I mean, you can see that that is the case, that in some respects that's been used as a weapon. But as I look ahead, again, I know we always want to be really careful, but I do believe that when you look at the redistricting of some of these congressional districts, of the failure of passing the Build Back Better Act, some of the things you just said about Joe Biden, it does seem to me that we should really be paying attention more than ever during this off-year election of 2022. What's your thoughts?
This is an incredibly important election. I mean, I've been doing this stuff for many, many years. We won't get into how many years, but and to me, all the elections are important. But if we continue down the road of the policies that are being pushed now with these narrow majorities that the president has in the House, and then the tie, which is the tie in the Senate, which is broken then by the vice president. And yet, with those narrow majorities, he keeps pushing these radical social changes. If we have another 2 or, God forbid, 6 years of this, I'm not sure the country can be retrieved. I don't think the damage can be undone. So the first real chance to stop this steamroller, we've had some victories, but to really stop it are these upcoming congressional elections. And the House is totally up for re-election. A third of the Senate is. So the voters in every state in the union, including millions of people, Kerby, that are feeling buyer's remorse, people that voted for Biden because they thought he was a moderate, and instead they end up seeing him surrounding himself with socialists and Marxists and some of the radical proposals we've seen coming out of the White House. So this is a key election. I think it's possible that we could take the Senate back by a couple of votes, which would be huge, and it is possible we would win anything from the conservatives would win anything from 30 seats to maybe even 50 seats in the House of Representatives.
Well, again, I'm going to give you your marching orders. Number one, you can go to the website here, and we have a link to ouramericanvalues.org. Sign up for the end-of-day report if you haven't. Certainly pray for Gary Bauer and his staff, but most importantly, there's a yellow button there that says donate, and I would encourage you that while you are supporting Point of View, you recognize that our eyes and ears there in Washington, D.C. are Gary Bauer and American Values, and we encourage you to support them as well. And you have a match on the table, so that means somebody wants to give you $50, it becomes $100. So, Gary, thank you for joining us, and Happy New Year. Look forward to working with you in 2022.
It's a pleasure always to be with you, Kerby. I don't know what people would do without Point of View. It's a worthy cause, and I will continue to partner with you as we try to get the country back on the right road.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back, and we've got a lot of things in the news to talk about. We'll do that right after this.
None of us like sending our hard-earned money to Washington. There's a way to avoid paying taxes and to use the money you save to fight for your values in the culture. And it's completely legal. If you make a gift from an investment account, even a retirement account, when you sell stocks or bonds to give, you have to pay capital gains taxes on the increased value of the stock. If you give the stock, there are no taxes, and you get a tax deduction for the full value of your gift. If your gift comes from an IRA, you can also make a qualified charitable distribution and skip paying taxes. This is also a great way to use that required minimum distribution. Check with your tax advisor to find what's best for your personal circumstances, but this is a way for your gift to have an even greater impact on the culture. For more information, you can call us at 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. Give and save on taxes. It's a great idea. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212, or else you can just sit back and listen to a couple of other issues in the news. And just as a program note, let me mention tomorrow will be an opportunity for us to gather together with some of the voices that we love to hear. We'll hear from Robert Knight, for example, and a number of others. And then Friday will be our weekend edition. So I think you will really appreciate some of the conversation that we're going to be having over the next couple of days. And in between, I'll try to drop in some other stories. Robert Knight, Jerry Newcomb. I couldn't think of the other person that is going to be joining us. And so that'll be a good opportunity on Thursday. And then, of course, Friday is our weekend edition. And that is the end of 2021, at least in terms of our broadcast. And as we've mentioned, I hope you'll consider what you might do. Not only support this ministry, but some of the others that we've highlighted. The radio station that carries this program, maybe your own church and Christian organizations, they certainly are important and very vital in this battle of really trying to fight against some of the ideas, error and evil in the world. We should be bringing truth and light, and that's why we're encouraging you to think about lighting some lamps. Haven't said much about COVID. Okay, we'll tell you a little bit about that, and then we're going to get into some other issues because there are a lot more to talk about, but not the least of which is you heard me yesterday just giving you the numbers. If you were to compare, and at that time I was using December 27th, the number of cases from December 27th in 2020 compared to December 27th in 2021, almost 4 times as many cases 2 days ago as what happened a year ago at that same time. The number of deaths comparable. And you've heard me say on this program before that you wouldn't know it by listening to the establishment media, perhaps because they figure everybody's exhausted by hearing this, or maybe they didn't want to bring out numbers that would look poorly for Donald Trump. They wanted to make Donald Trump look bad and wanted maybe Joe Biden to look good. But again, we've had more than 1,000 people dying every single day with or because, and we'll leave that as it is because we recognize some of that is manipulated. But if you do an apples to apples comparison, the same way they calculated those deaths a year ago, the way they did now, you are seeing that things have not changed. But what has changed is Omicron. And this is now from the World Health Organization. I know sometimes we tend not to want to believe them very much, but they are, I think, looking at numbers. And even if you disagree with the World Health Organization, and there are some reasons to do so, you have to say that they are being concerned about the fact that, as we've pointed out, Omicron is more transmissible. It's probably less lethal based upon what we know so far, but that doesn't mean that more people aren't catching it. In some respects, because it is less likely to reside in the lower lungs, but more in the upper lungs and even in the throat and nasal passages, which means when you sneeze or cough, it is much more likely that you will spread the virus. I won't go into all the gory details there, but this is what is coming out of Geneva right now from the World Health Organization. Quote, a tsunami of Omicron and Delta COVID-19 cases will pile pressure on health systems already stretched to their limits. That comes from the World Health Organization yesterday. The World Health Organization said that these variants are of concern and they're sort of twin threats, driving new case numbers to record highs, leading to spikes in hospitalizations and deaths. Again, we can recognize that the World Health Organization hasn't exactly been the pillar of integrity sometimes, but they can look at the numbers just like you can look at the numbers and recognize that we are seeing something that most people were not predicting. Another aspect of that is that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, actually have changed their numbers for the prevalence of Omicron in the United States. And that is somewhat significant as well, because originally they were saying that about 73% of all the cases for the week ending December 18th were Omicron. Now they've come back and said, well, if you look at those for those up to the December 25th, which would be, of course, Christmas Day, that's 59%. So they've revised the percentage of cases down, if you do the numbers, 22.5%. So it is kind of intriguing to see where that goes in terms of the variant. And so while we have the, if you will, increase in the Omicron variant, the whole Delta variant hasn't been sidelined, and so we are still dealing with quite a number. The best estimates are, if you look at the average, and again, I'm using CDC numbers. Again, we can have some questions about them and all the rest. 206,000 new cases every single day, and even around the studio, we have some individuals that have tested positive, at least one individual I'm aware of, and others that could have been with that. So it illustrates that we are in a bit of a hump at the moment, which leads me to a piece that Gary Bauer and I were talking about, and this comes from Rich Lowry. I didn't post this one, but it maybe is one that you could read on your own if you wanted to, because what was so kind of intriguing is Rich Lowry, hardly a pro-Trump kind of person, he lots of times ended up being pretty much on the anti-Trump view and bandwagon, but nevertheless, his piece today, when does Trump get his apology? Now, you know where we're going with this, because he says, now in the fullness of time and now the Omicron wave have made it obvious how preposterously over the top and unfair the chief lines of criticism against Donald Trump were during the pandemic. Because it was said over and over again that Trump almost single-handedly killed thousands upon thousands of Americans. He then gives you some quotes. Chris Hayes a couple of months ago called for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission type of inquiry on how former President Donald Trump willfully got hundreds of thousands of people killed, willfully. And then, of course, you had Whoopi Goldberg and others saying that the former president, had blood on his hands during one of the presidential debates. Rich Lowry reminds us, Joe Biden said of Donald Trump, anyone who's responsible for that many deaths, because at the time it was about 200,000 deaths, should not remain as president of the United States. Well, then, of course, Rich Lowry's having a little bit of fun with that argument. Why then does Biden still get to stay in office? Tragically, about as many people have died of COVID this year as in 2020. Actually, if you look at an apples-to-apples comparison, probably even more so, but we'll leave it as it is. And it illustrates the fact that if now we're at, what's the number everybody's talking about? 800,000 deaths. You can simply see that that is the case. And it is a good illustration of the fact that there has been just a tremendous amount of arrogance, a lot of pride, and yet there's maybe the need for some humility. So if you want to take two H's, hubris over humility. Now, you've heard me before point out that if you actually on a scale, and I guess I could even reach it for those of you that actually are watching online, because it was perhaps one of the most interesting graphs I think I've ever seen, in which what it simply did was to look at the number of deaths per 100,000 and then begin to plot those out in terms of red states and blue states and the rest. And again, for those of you watching online, I'll hold it up again. It's just very illustrative of the fact. This one isn't perfectly accurate because what they do here is they consider the state a red state if it has a Republican governor, which is why if you look down here, Massachusetts is in red. I think almost everybody would assume that Massachusetts is a blue state. But okay, let's blame the governors. You can see if you were to look online, or you find my column because it is available very easily, that what you find is that 5 of the top 6 would be what you would consider to be blue states, or 9 out of the top 14 would be blue states. So if indeed you accepted the argument that the Republican governors were irresponsible, then you would expect to mostly see red states on the top, blue states on the bottom. What you don't see is any kind of pattern at all. You see some blue states, you see some red states, you see a fair number of red states in the middle, you see some red and blue states even with the lowest death rate. And the point I'm making is there is a place for maybe a real call for humility in the midst of this. We know now more than we've ever known the fact that there are certain aspects of this virus that are difficult to predict. There are differences in terms of the number of people per square mile that I think affect the contagion. There are certain things that might have been helped slightly by the lockdowns, but in many cases you don't see any kind of reasonable pattern between those states which had very rigorous rules and those states which had much more open rules, between those which had extensive lockdowns and those that did not. If nothing else, I think it has caused a lot of people, if they would be honest for just a moment, to say, maybe I needed a little bit more humility before I got in front of a microphone and made some kind of outrageous statement. And some of the politicians have made such statements that I think Rich Lowry's point's a good one. Where does Donald Trump go to get his apology? Well, he won't get one. We know that. But it, I think, illustrates again that if you're looking for information, that's why we're trying to provide as much of it here at Point of View. Even when sometimes we may not like what it says, let's tell you the truth. Let you make the decisions from there. We'll take a break. We got a lot more to cover. We will do that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio, and we air Point of View on AFR, American Family Radio. Folks, Kerby Anderson and the team there deserve your financial support to keep promoting the gospel and the truth about what's going on in our country. So if you would, write them a check, give them a donation with your credit card, whatever you can do to help them keep the cause of Christ before the public on their radio program, Point of View.
So again, very good comments from our good friend Tim Wildman, and we hope that you will consider today even of actually joining with us. As I've mentioned before, we do have a match on the table, and as long as it's up there, that means it's a dollar-for-dollar match for you to take advantage of. As you go to the website here, of course, you'll find an opportunity for you to donate, but also some other articles that I wanted to get to. One of those, which we've posted on inflation. Spencer Brown, this piece, I'll let you read it in its entirety, talks about the fact that people are saying, well, inflation is transitory. Nobody believes that, and there's every reason to believe that inflation rates will go up. Now, you might say, well, do you have some kind of crystal ball, Kerby Anderson? No, but I know what to read, and that is oftentimes if you look at the consumer price index, it follows the producer price index, or what many people call the wholesale prices, then end up in the retail prices. So when we look at that, we can see that the producer price index, or what some people call the wholesale prices, was higher than the index for inflation. So that means if you just play that out sometime in January, inflation is going to go even higher. You don't have to get into all the numbers there. You can also get the general sense that that's where it is going. And this first piece by Spencer Brown takes you through that and helps you understand that, look, it just seems like in light of the price hikes for manufacturers and producers, if I can quote one quote that he has in there from the Wall Street Journal, everything from coffee to mustard is getting more expensive next year. So that's the case. And so you're going to see, well, how expensive can things get? Well, according to some of the estimates, food prices are estimated to rise an additional 5% in the first half of 2022. 5% is still relatively low, but I've found that most of the time when people make predictions, they're oftentimes lower than the reality. And then it takes you through some of the kinds of brands that had been evaluated and the rest. So if you want to try to understand what inflation might look like, that's an article I've posted because it's one of the few I found to tell us the truth. You might remember that a couple of days ago, that would be my December 27th commentary, was actually entitled Economic Cheerleaders, in which I've pointed out that there are a number of people that have been trying to tell us that the economy is doing just fine. And I think most of us know that it's not. And of course, the day after that, I actually had a commentary in which I quoted from Newt Gingrich saying, you don't even have to trust the people that are looking at these numbers. Just go and talk to people filling up their gas tank, buying groceries, trying to get supplies for their business. You know what's going on. And so, again, we are going to treat you as adults that want to hear the truth, and that is certainly the case. One other piece I thought I might mention is Jim Garrity. Well, we've been talking about COVID-19. He says, when will the rest of the world call out China's insanely implausible COVID-19 statistics? Because not only has China, I think, lied about whether or not the virus came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, not only did China cover up the fact that it was much more deadly than they would let on, but they also have suggested that only really a few individuals have been affected by Omicron, when we are averaging, this particular article says 237,000 cases per day. I just read you another piece that had an average of 206,000 cases per day. But in either case, this doesn't even pass what we oftentimes around the table call the straight face test. And so that's one more article to mention. Just before we wind down for today, every once in a while people say, who can I trust in terms of the media? And we have certainly over the years learned to even trust our friends at places like the Media Research Center. But this is one of the times where you will hear me maybe disagreeing with them, because they at Newsbusters have argued that over the weekend, when CBS was doing the Face the Nation segment, when they were doing it online, there was a very powerful argument by Jan Crawford, which then they accused CBS of censoring. I'm not so sure it's fair to say that while they were doing a broadcast and then at the end had an online question where they were asking about unreported stories or poorly reported stories. Then she made some comments which didn't make it onto the broadcast but are online. So I'm a little less likely to call that necessarily a censor. But what she did was simply point out the incredible devastation that these lockdowns have had on children. If you haven't seen it, you can find it. Of course, we can also post it if you'd like, in which he points out that the risk of suicide, girl suicides in particular, up 51% this year. Black kids nearly twice as likely as white kids to die of suicide. School closures, lockdowns, cancellation of sports. You couldn't even go onto a playground in the District of Columbia without cops scurrying, getting and shooing kids off. And she goes on to talk about the tremendous negative impact on kids, and it's been an afterthought. And she said it's hurt their dreams, their future learning, loss, risk of abuse, mental health. And now, with our knowledge, our vaccines, if our policy don't reflect, she says, a more measured and reasonable approach for our children, we will be paying for our children's decisions, and they will be paying for it the rest of their lives. And she was really raising the question as to whether or not we need to vaccinate young kids and whether or not these lockdowns made any sense. So it is a particular video that has been going viral, but I would be a little more hesitant to say that it was a deliberate attempt to censor her comments. But if you want to read it or to see it in its entirety, it was very articulate indeed. Even if it didn't make it onto the Face the Nation broadcast, it's certainly available out there on various websites for you to watch as well. That brings us back to one of the reasons why we do what we do. Whether or not is intentional, whether it's censorship, whether it's accidental, they're just certain stories that we're going to cover here on Point of View that are not going to be covered anywhere else. All the ones we talked about with Kelly Shackelford. How many times have you heard about these religious liberty victories except here on Point of View? How many times have you heard individuals talk about how culpable China is when, after all, there could be a price to pay in terms of viewership or customers or a variety of other issues? And so we try to talk about all those topics and many, many more. So as we come to the end of our Wednesday broadcast, let me certainly encourage you to click on that button that is at our website, pointofview.net, and click on the button that says donate, and you will certainly see some great opportunities for you to support this ministry. Don't forget, my Viewpoints commentary today is about the religious schools issue we talked about with Kelly Shackelford. We have a Take Action where you can get a free booklet on media bias, so we want to provide you with as much information and resources possible so that you can light lamps in your sphere of influence, your community, your church, your family, wherever it might be. So again, as we come down to the end of December 29th on a Wednesday, let me encourage you to go to that website, pointofview.net. We have a $1 for $1 match, or even though we're going off the air, we will still take phone calls at 1-800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151, and we will certainly be glad to chat with you off air. Want to see Andrew back as our engineer. Want to thank Ivy for stepping in for Steve as he is under the weather, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Sometimes the daily news is flat out confusing, depressing. In fact, it's dark. In the chaos,